Shalom Uvracha, and welcome to Yeshiva Shalmaila, to the headline show. My name is Yehoshua Pfeffer. I'm filling in for David this week. And this week is Parshas Beshalach, in which we find HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us that if we follow his directives, if we follow the Torah, then Kol HaMachala Asher Samti B'Mitzrayim Lo Osim Alecha Ki Ani Hashem Reifecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our doctor. He is our healer. And this is provides us with a good opportunity to discuss different methods, different forms of healing. Specifically, the discussion is going to center around alternative or complementary medicine. We all agree that there's a mitzvah, there's a chiyuv to go to a healing practitioner, a doctor, in order to remedy ourselves of our illnesses. Rabbi Shavais, Rabbi in a tshuva in Chelek Aleph, he writes, he opens up a tshuva, and he writes that there's a chiyuv gomer ala choyle lishtadel b'refuah hatevis ve'enenu rashay lismich al hanes. A person mustn't rely on miracles. If he has an ailment, an illness, which can often deteriorate into potentially dangerous or chas v'shalom life-threatening conditions, then a person is chayav to deal with the ailment through the known methods of refuah, of medical treatment that helps. We know that the Ramban in the beginning of Parshas Bechukosai says famously that a person who is a tzaddik, someone who's a chassid, someone who's on a high enough madrega, he shouldn't go to Roifim. He has a very famous statement that Malu Roife beBeis Hashem, there's no place for a Roife in the Beis Hashem, in a place for somebody who has a deep emunah and a deep Hashkafa of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on him. However, it's important to note, the Ramban says in his halachic sefer, in Teres HaAdam, the Ramban says explicitly that a person is chayev. He says the reshus of going to a doctor, he says, is not a reshus that's an optional reshus. He says, ki hai reshus de mitzvahu, the lashon of the Ramban, it's a reshus de mitzvah, lisrapois. And he says, ubichlal pekuach nefesh. So in his halachic works, the Ramban says it's a mitzvah, it's a chiyuv to go to a doctor. The same thing in the Milchames, in Sanhedrin, Tafein Dalet. The Ramban says, Lo shamanu midas chasidus lechole shel sakana shelo yichalelu Shabbos. There's no such thing as not being mechadal Shabbos because we believe in a Kodesh Baruch Hu's refuah. V'amuneh atzma mischayev benafshe, the Ramban says. And even the Ramban in Bechukosai is speaking about a very high madrega. He's speaking about a time that Yisrael Rabbim v'shleimim be'eret Yisrael. The Netziv says famously in Hemek Davar, in Bamidbar, in Perik Vav, Pasuk Yudalet, the Netziv says that a person is not allowed to live on a madrega, to live as if he were on a madrega that is above his ruchniistic level. And which one of us is on the level that the Ramban is speaking about, in which we can say that a Kodesh Baruch Hu will perform a nace for us, and we don't need to go to doctors. So certainly the assumption, the obvious assumption that we all live by is that we go to doctors, and we in fact go to the best of doctors. We make a real hishtadlus to find the right practitioner, the best practitioner for our condition. And then the question is, well, if we're going to medical practitioners, then what kind of medical practitioners should we be considering? Should we be going to? Should we go to strictly conventional, science-based medicine that really bases itself on the latest kind of scientific and academic research, which is what your conventional doctors will tell you? Or should we take into account the possibility, at the very least, of going to non-conventional practitioners, alternative healing? This is sometimes known as CAM, complementary and alternative medicine. And we're speaking about a very, very wide range of practices, a whole array of different kind of therapies and treatments. We know the famous ones: homeopathy, acupuncture, reflexology, different herbal medicines, and also the more spiritual types, kinesiology, hypnotherapy we could include in this, and many others, pendulum treatments, a lot of different types of alternative medicine practices and practitioners. Now, anecdotally, we all know that a lot of these treatments and remedies get a certain bad name from practitioners who are not necessarily the most professional, not necessarily the most upright. But let's assume now that we're talking about practitioners who are fully qualified in their specific field. These are professional practitioners. They've studied, they've understood the principles. Some of them are also conventional doctors, and they also know the latest research on conventional medicine. But they will advise you to perhaps alongside conventional medicine or in place of, to try one of these alternative practices. What is the Torah approach to these practices? Is there a halachic consensus concerning all of these different types of alternative medicine? Is there a distinction between those that are based on herbal therapies and those, for example, that are based on more spiritual ideas or energy ideas, which are obviously slightly different? One is more a natural means, even if it's herbology or homeopathy, and one is a more supernatural treatment. So is there a distinction between those types? Alternative and complementary medicine is certainly a part of our culture. Something like $35 billion are spent every year just in the USA on complementary medicine. This is a major industry. It's a major part of our culture to also try often, sometimes again in place of, and sometimes in tandem with conventional medicine. And certainly it's important, I think, to think about these concepts of medicine and alternative medicine from a Torah perspective. The Gemara has certainly what to say about this. Later authorities have a lot to say about different types of medicine. We know in the Gemara there are many different types of remedies that for us look extremely supernatural and that certainly today would be classified as alternative medicine. Cutting a tooth of a live fox hanging around a person's neck, or the tooth of a dead fox, and different stones and gems and kameot, of course, different charms. All of these are in the Gemara. But again, the medicine of one generation becomes the alternative medicine of the next generation, based on research, based on empirical research, based on experience. And the question is, how do poskim and how do we generally see the Torah perspective concerning these types of practices and of healing techniques? So in today's show, we're going to have 3 fascinating interviews about this topic. One of them is going to outline the different range of alternative practices, give us some seder, give us some order and some structure to the alternative practices and therapies that are available, and to open up the question of the Torah approach to these different methods that are available. We're going to have an interview from a strictly Torah perspective, a halachic and Torah perspective, to underlie the Rambam's approach, which is a rationalist approach, versus non-Rambam or other Rishonim that perhaps took a different approach that's very relevant, not just to questions of medicine and which treatment or method to go to, but also as a way of life. It's much beyond alternative versus conventional medicine, and also very much relevant to a broader attitude towards life in general. And then we're going to go into one specific form of healing. We don't have time on a short show to speak about all the different types of alternative practices and all of their different applications, but we're going to speak about one which is relevant to all of us at some stage of our lives in Mircha Hashem, and that's having children, and the question of conventional gynecology versus holistic gynecology, and specifically the question of non-hospital settings for birth. Again, conventional doctors will say, of course, a woman should certainly give birth in a hospital, but today it's becoming more and more popular, together with some significant amount of data and research that indicates that non-hospital settings could also be beneficial in many ways. And we're going to speak about the holistic approach to gynecology generally and to birth specifically, and to try to really provide an insightful and illuminating show in all of these different angles concerning alternative complementary medicine versus the more conventional science-based medicine. And Mircha Hashem should all have a wonderful and important experience of listening, and it should really be insightful and important as guidance for our lives al pi haTorah. So we're honored to have on today's show Harav Shabtai Rappaport, formerly the head of the Beis Midrash in Bar-Ilan, and also somebody who edited several volumes of Iggros Moshe and also of Rav Moshe Feinstein's Dibros Moshe. Harav Rappaport, thank you very much for being with us. It's really an honor. And maybe I'll just start off with an open-ended question. We know that there are different types of alternative medicine. Some of them are more natural medicines like homeopathy or herbology with herbs, or physiological treatments like chiropractic. That's one type of alternative medicine. And then you have the more supernatural treatments like the energy healing, faith healing amulets, incantations, pendulums. So these are, I mean, again, many types, and each one of these categories also breaks down into many types. Do you think that you would be able to present a general approach of halacha towards alternative medicines of all of these different types, or how would it break down? How would you present the halachic approach to these types of alternative medicines?
Thank you for inviting me. And the halachic approach has to do with a philosophical approach, because the one who opposed alternative medicines very vehemently, all kinds of alternative medicine, was the Rambam. But the question is, what is alternative medicine? Alternative to what? The Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim that in order to justify use of medicine, it has to be in accordance of logic. Yes, he speaks about logic and experience, or empirical experience. This use of logic and experience was questioned by the Rashba, who said whose logic and whose experience. If we are talking about the logic of the early Greeks, like Aristo and the first doctors, then medicine is stuck in one place.
Right.
Then medicine is stuck in one place and cannot move. And if so how can you get new medicines? And what kind of experience you need? And is the empirical experiment or experience? I rather use experience, not experiments, because I don't think they understood the concept then. How do you tie it with the logic? If it fits the logic, you don't need the empirical experience. And if it doesn't fit with logic, then what is it, a wonder? And
well, the Rambam mentions either one or the other. No, the Rambam says either
right, but the Rashba did not.
Or
Rashba ignores it. And then the Rashba says, look, we have compass, the magnetic force. Now, magnetic force has no logic, but we know that it exists. Boats navigate with the compass. So how would you explain that? So, of course, the answer is what you said, that it's either experience or logic. But the Rashba understood, and I think correctly, that the Rambam means some integral scientific approach that takes experience or experiment and logic together. And this was actually Aristo's approach.
You mean to say that according to Maimonides, according to the Rambam, if there's no logic, then even if you have people who claim experience, then this wouldn't be sufficient.
Right, because the experience is wrong. Exactly, it's mistaken. Exactly. So the Rashba says what we say about a magnet. Now, right. But the Rambam himself says that I know about laxatives, I prescribe laxatives, and I don't know how they work. There is no logic as to how they work. So, you see, there is a moot point here, because if I don't take the philosophical approach of logic that understands everything, like a beam of light that can shine all the dark corners, then it does not exist. So it's a good question. How come the laxatives work? So the question of alternative medicine is alternative to what, and what are when the Rambam opposed alternative medicine, what was his point? And he has a very strong halachic point. It starts with philosophy, but it's a very strong halachic point in Perek Yud Avodah Zarah, Hilchot Avodah Zarah. And the idea is simple. The Rambam says that the Torah main point in the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, in the negative commandments, was to prevent us from following Avodah Zarah in any form. So Avodah Zarah, of course, is in the in the regular rituals of Avodah Zarah, and also the thought of Avodah Zarah. We have to understand there is one creator to the world that reveal that the laws of the creation are the source of understanding him and loving him and fearing him. That's what he writes in Perek Aleph Yesodei Torah. And also he repeats it in Moreh Nevuchim many times. So when you look for some alternatives, for things that are easier to understand, closer to us, like gods, like devils, like demons, like powers, like spirits, like energies, this is Avodah Zarah.
I mean, again, the Rambam in Perek Yud Aleph of Avodah Zarah, there he speaks about the mitzvah of Tamim Tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. That's kind of the converse. He says that that the Torah forbids us from believing in any of the kind of these spirits and magic and sorcery and astrology and all of, right? Not like the Ramban. The Ramban says that these things are real, but you should not address them. You shouldn't go to them for your counsel and advice. The Rambam says no, they're just false, and the Torah forbids them.
The Torah, they are false, right? The Rambam says they are false, and Tamim, according to the Rambam and the Ramban argue in a very basic concept. According to the Rambam, the Torah ordered you to have the right belief. It's not the first you believe and then you follow the Torah. The Rambam says that Anochi Hashem Elokecha is a commandment. So the Torah forbade you from, the Torah told you, don't believe in that. And then don't believe in Avodah Zarah. Not only you don't practice Avodah Zarah, but don't believe in Avodah Zarah. And everyone that believes in, everyone that has a false belief, according to the Rambam in Ilchot Shuvah, he says he loses the chelek in Olam Haba lerov ra'ato, or also in he loses the power to be choser b'tshuva because it's very evil. To have a wrong approach to the world or belief in forces is a real evil.
At the end of Perek Yud Aleph, Kol hamaymin b'dvarim elu u'machashiv bilu b'shem emes v'divrei chachma aval ha'Torah asra isan. He says that's wrong. He says it's not that they are chachma but the Torah forbids them. It's that they are themselves nonsense. He says, Tamim Tiyeh. But how would this apply then to alternative medicine? Because
exactly,
let's say,
here is the point.
Yes.
Here is the point. What is the motive for alternative medicine? Alternative medicine comes from two, I'll say, sides of a spectrum. And of course, there is a whole spectrum between them. One is that I want to see something tangible that will work because I'm afraid. I want to see something that I can do and will help me because I have tremendous fear of death, fear of pain, chas v'sholem, and I want to do something which is tangible, that I can put my hands on it and do it against ein hore or to get out some spirit or to get some energy, whatever, all these things. So he says, according to the Rambam, this is the basic thing that that is forbidden by the Torah, because what happens in the world, and we should believe in Kodesh Baruch Hu, that everything goes according to Kodesh Baruch Hu's plan, and our aim in life is to understand Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Okay. Meaning that the way the world functions, the way we can understand the function of the world, this is, according to the Rambam, this is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to function in the world based on a logical understanding of the processes that are built into the world.
So the logical, now what is logical? The term logical changes with the ages, changed tremendously. And I will say that instead of logical, you can say maybe universal or explainable. That what you see in the world can be explained in terms that are taken from the world itself or from the relationship of the world with Kodesh Baruch Hu. Meaning I don't have to introduce another thing or another force or things that are mystical. I take the world as universal thing guided by Kodesh, universal entity guided by Kodesh Baruch Hu. And no hidden traps. You cannot say, don't get married in this day because you have a trap. Kodesh Baruch Hu did not put traps in the world and did not put doesn't have demons hidden to trap you. So and also there are no forces that you can harness in order to overcome the natural laws. But the natural laws themselves and understanding them, of course, changes with the ages. No one can deny that. The Rambam himself says that. They changed from Chazal time to his time, he says that, and of course they will change. He understood that they are going to change after his time onwards.
Right, so if the Rambam himself, let's say, believed in the efficiency of bloodletting, because that was based on their own understanding, that letting blood is a helpful medical procedure, and they understood why it worked, because it takes out bad blood and whatever it is. And now we would say somebody who lets blood today, that would be, for the Rambam, Darche Emori or Kishuf or something problematic.
Exactly. Like the Rambam himself says about things that are mentioned in the Gemara, that Chazal thought that the experience or experiment proves them. And he says there is also disagreement in the Mishnah in Yoma about eating part of a liver of rabid dog in order to heal rabies.
So the Rambam there paskins, there's a machlekes, Rav Masya and
Matya ben Acharash and Chachamim, and the Rambam explains that Chachamim said there is no experience that shows that. It's only old women, or the belief that we see one case that someone recovers does not mean anything. And and here the Rambam actually laid down the rule of scientific experiment and controlled trials and all this. You have to know that you cannot learn anything from a limited amount of cases, because always in medicine you have to ask yourself, did the person get better in spite of the medicine, regardless of the medicine, or because of the medicine? And in order to make a decision like that, you have to go and develop and hone your experimental technique more and more. And so if you use experimental techniques from 1,000 years ago, it's no good. Or from 30 years ago, it's no good. For example, if you want to make a controlled trial to decide whether for breast cancer, whether surgery is better or chemotherapy is better, can you use chemotherapy instead of surgery? In the 90s, they believed that a sample of like 20,000 women could be enough. Then they realized you need more than 100,000 people. And then now they think they need more. And currently they think that you need the entire population. Now the databases encompass the entire population.
Meaning that the data is meaning what we thought was once reliable data or reliable experiential fact is now considered to be debunked. It's now not good enough.
Exactly.
I mean, the question would be, though, for example, the Rambam still mentions in Hilchos Shabbos, he still mentions those refuahs that Chazal mentioned. I think over there it speaks about a tooth of a wolf or something like that,
of a fox,
maybe a tooth of a fox.
Shen min hashual. And masmer min hatzaluv, a nail from a hanged person. Yeah.
Now the Rambam has a very interesting lashon there. He says v'chein medamim ba'alei askulot, that it works. But he paskins that it works. I mean, again, he paskins that you're allowed to do this on Shabbos.
No, I'm sorry. He doesn't paskin that it works. He paskin that you can take it out on Shabbos. The question is
that's
like
right,
this.
that you can take it out on Shabbos, correct. That's what he paskins. And some people
he
say
doesn't paskin that you can use it.
Some people say it's the Rabbanon. Right. That's what he says. Correct.
So I will explain. The question is, what happens if you subjectively believe that something helps because you know the experience. You don't know anything about spirits. You don't know anything about demons. You know it works. I don't know how. Like when they discovered how penicillin works, so they saw that the molecule, the mold, kills the bacteria. They didn't know how. They didn't know that it has something to do with the food that the bacteria takes. It simply kills the bacteria. How do we do it? I don't know. So you can use penicillin without knowing how it works. You don't say there is the demon of the penicillin that kills the bacteria. You say it works. And the same thing, they knew that a nail from the hanged person works. Rambam said they had experiment like this. Any person who is nowadays in the Rambam's time and thinks that it works, so he has the cover of Chazal. He says, it says so in the Talmud. This belief is based in is written in the Talmud. I have no reason to reject it. I'm not forced to reject it. But the Rambam says if you are more advanced and you know that Masmer min Atzeluv, the experiment is nothing, that it was bad data, that people recover just because of natural recovery, and you know that it has nothing to do with the Tzeluv, only you believe in some spiritual thing that Medamim Baalei Asgulot, you would think there is some hidden mystical force that can heal, then you're a bad person. Then you're close to Avodah Zarah. But I want to tell you something that the Marshal says, which is very interesting.
But let me just understand this then. You're saying that the Rambam is bringing this in Hilchot Shabbat, in Hilchot Shabbos, because he's relying on the experience that Chazal are bringing us, or they are testifying to this experience. But he would say, if you want to ask me, should you rely on this for healing, then he would say, you know what, you should ask people who have experience from today, or maybe our methods are now more advanced, and you wouldn't rely on it. I'm just thinking, there's a certain tension here between the Hilchos Shabbos and the Hilchos Refuah, if you want.
Right. The Rambam does not recommend it as medicine. He says you can do it if you believe in it, and once you believe in it, it becomes a tachshit. Jewelry. Why women wear diamonds?
Right. Meaning it's a tachshit, but for us, if we're not going to do it anymore, because for us it's not a refuah, then it would also not be a tachshit.
Once it becomes accepted. Once it becomes accepted, it's not a refuah, it will stop being tachshit, right?
Right.
Tachshit will also stop being tachshit if women will decide it's foolish to wear diamonds.
Right. Chas v'shonim. Sorry, you were going to say something from the Marshal, yes.
Yes, the Marshal has a very interesting tshuva. He writes about someone who is very sick and a witch proposed some medicine. So he says the Rambam answers, even though the Ramban is matir, and he says, but we cannot argue against the Rambam. We have no koach to argue against the Rambam or to do anything against the Rambam. However, he says it's pikuach nefesh. So since it's pikuach nefesh, we can try it. Now, I don't know if the Marshal realized that it's self-contradictory. That what he said is self-contradictory, because the Rambam says that whatever works is mutter. Anything that works, it proves that it's not avodah zarah. Let's say that the people in the Amazonas, the wild tribes in the Amazon, have a dance and a whole thing, and they have medicine, and the medicine helps your heart. And actually, what they use is the digitalis root, that they use now to help the heartbeat. So this is not also. I understand that the avodah zarah part is nothing. The whole ceremony is nothing. But if it works, it works. So I'll say, listen, something works here, and I have to investigate what works. But the Rambam never objected to something that works. The Rambam objected to something that doesn't work.
Right, but then the question would be, and this I think brings us very much to the modern issues of alternative medicine, because you have certain things, whether it's kinesiology or whether it's pendulum methods, that you have a certain number of people that are willing to swear by these methods, even homeopathy. You have people that will swear by homeopathy, that will swear by these methods. And the Marshal presumably was speaking about people like these, that these people are swearing by these methods, even though, by all kinds of standards of modern testing, whether in the Marshal's time or today, we would not allow them into our medical books. They would not have any place in our universities and so on. However, people are swearing by them because of their own experience or because of their own intuitions. So do we have nothing to tell them? Do we only tell people you should go with your experience?
Okay, so let's take it step by step. The Rambam says that it's also to be lochesh, to whisper a posuk on a makah. It's a terrible thing because you make the psukim, the Torah, which would heal the soul, the minds, you make it into refuat guf, and it's a total. It's also
but for the psychology. But for the psychology, he said it's mutter. If a person. But he says for psychological reasons it could be mutter. No, if a person needs it.
But the Rambam says if someone is very worried and he's going because he's very agitated, you're allowed to say psukim in order to calm him down.
Right.
So the thing is it's practical. Now, practical could be very subjective in the sense that it's not for everyone, what they call placebo effect, which is also a name. That's why I told you it's a spectrum. People say that people can, so people say, listen, for me it works. But usually it's not so. Usually I'll come to homeopathic medicine in a second. But usually it comes from a whole belief that is wrong. Belief of energies, of demons, of sgulot. It comes from a background of avodah zarah, and always people found avodah zarah healing. They found avodah zarah that calms you down. If you have something real, something tangible, it's better for you. That's why people invented avodah zarah, like he says in avodah zarah perek aleph. So the fact that you feel better with avodah zarah does not make avodah zarah real or does not justify avodah zarah. What you said about something that is people swear by it is things that are not avodah zarah. You think that they are natural, that in nature. So actually, Rambam's medicine, Rambam's himself in Hilchot Deot seems like naturopathy or they call it the Rambam's medicine. That is not is not
it's like
backed by real data. It's something that is backed.
So it's really two types of alternative medicine. One of them that believes in something supernatural, energy.
I would not say supernatural. I would say undernatural.
Okay.
Demons that are under the water, that are under the earth, that are inside small things.
Mm-hmm.
Supernatural is only Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Right. Okay. I accept the correction, even though convention has it otherwise. But so you would say that the homeopathy, you would say then, is not a problem in halacha because it's natural. Again, it's very strange. It's very unnatural though to say. Okay, go ahead. How would you address that?
However, when the thing is that when you make experiments, and in the book Trickle Treatment, the writer, the two authors that dealt a lot with and made a lot of experiments with homeopathy, they showed that homeopathic water did not do any better than faucet water, plain faucet water, that were labeled as homeopathic water. Nothing whatsoever. The faucet water were actually a little bit better, did a little bit better than homeopathic water. So once you are faced with it and you say it doesn't work, but still I want to believe that it works because it's easier. It's much better than changing my lifestyle. It's much better than chas v'shalom, understanding that it's the end of my life. It's an easy way out. That's wrong, even if it's natural, because it goes again to the basic things of Avodah Zarah. Because according to the Rambam, Avodah Zarah actually started with the basic laws of nature, with Avodat HaAdama, with farming. So the thing is that people don't accept. A person has current colds, has problems, is liable to get infections. So it says if you use homeopathic medicine, everything will be okay because it's very easy. There's no problem, and you hug this belief, and sometimes you don't have these infections, so you say, wow, I swear by it, it helps, but actually it's an easy way out. And this is the wrong thing. This is the Avodah Zarah-like idea. However, if it's something that, if you follow the Rambam's medicine, it's full of effort. You have to change the lifestyle. You have to do exercise. You have to live healthily. The difference between homeopathy and naturopathy and Rambam's medicine is that if you see an easy solution to an ongoing problem of allergy, there is someone suffers from ongoing symptoms. So if you look for an easy solution, you have to swallow something every day, few times a day. This is the way of Avodah Zarah. It's auspicious. So it's good if science proves it, if you have good data. But if the data goes against it, but people say that it helps subjectively, they feel it helps them, it's because it's easy. On the other hand, if they tell you you have to change your way of life, you have to live healthy, you have to breathe fresh air, you have to eat healthier food, you have to eat less.
Exercise.
And
right.
So this, according to the Rambam at least, is real Avodat Hashem.
Right. Okay. But what you're saying is something subtle. It's for example, what happens if you have something which we can't explain? Okay, but for example, using a pigeon or a bird to place on your stomach in order to heal
hepatitis. Yes.
Hepatitis.
They dealt it with hepatitis. Yes.
Right, certain types of hepatitis. Or I would say, there's a famous skula of drinking water from the Sataf, somewhere in Israel, that helps an infant that is the wrong way around, right? Someone who is a mother who is pregnant with an infant who is positioned badly, and then you drink this water and it helps the infant to turn around. Now, it's not that there's any other way of getting the infant to turn around, but this is a well-known skula. You would say that this itself is not problematic. It's only problematic when it's been debunked, when it's proven wrong, and then you still want to rely on it because you're taking an easy route rather than taking the real route, which is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects us to take.
Exactly. Exactly. You don't accepting a reality is the real Avodat Hashem, right? And the Rambam writes it so strongly in the story of Eov that accepting reality is the thing of Avodat Hashem, and trying to drink water to avoid the reality is totally wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what you would say if I'll just allow us to sum up the conversation, you would say that the question of alternative medicine and conventional medicine is not really, it would be wrong to limit the conversation only to the question of medicine, because really it's a question of a way of life. It's about how do you look at the world and how do you look at life. It's not really a limited local question of alternative medicine or not.
Right. Again, it all starts from the Rambam, and the Rambam starts the discussion with farming, not at all with medicine, with problem with the Gemarot about doing things with plants that are sick, a tree that is sick, and so on.
Right,
so
the Gemara
he says that
putting a string, if you put a string around the tree, the Gemara says
red string, exactly.
Right, the red string, that's right. So, but let's say a person will say, you know what, that's the Rambam, But I'm not a Maimonidean. I'm not a Rambamist. I want to go with the Rashba, with the Ramban. The Rashba and the Ramban, they say yes, we have metaphysical things, and they are real. And in some instances, the Torah forbids it, but in other instances, the Torah doesn't forbid it. And even though there is an academic method and a scientific method, I prefer the metaphysical method, the Ramban method. Would this be a again, it's not the Rambam, but would you think that this is wrong by definition? There's something inherently wrong with that?
There is a very interesting thing. The Ramban and the Rashba held that astrology is science. And in the rational period, they laughed at it. They said, now that we know about the structure of the universe and the galaxies, so the constellations have nothing to do with each other. It's only an apparent that we see them this way, so astrology is stupid. So a French scientist tried to see whether astrology has any real thing in it. He tries statistically to see the people that are born in a certain mazal have a certain trait.
People still read this stuff in the horoscopes. Okay.
What?
Even today, people are still reading in the newspapers what's the horoscope
today. Of course. So again, the easy way out. They don't want to.
Right.
As easy way out, it's wonderful, but someone really researched it. And the amazing thing that he found out that there is a statistical bias for that. It's really amazing. So the question is, if you want to follow the Ramban, the only thing is what the Maharshal said, that it's very hard to, even if you don't adhere to the Rambam, very zealously, very in a very pure way, still to argue against him, to go against him nowadays, it's very, very difficult, because he says it's Avodah Zarah. The Ramban says not, and there is no Sanhedrin to hold like the Ramban on the Rashba. Then in the strongest Isur Deoraita, which could shape our entire belief, it's very difficult to argue against the Rambam, to do things against the Rambam.
Right. On the one hand, it's hard to do things against the Rambam, but on the other hand, like you said before, this is not a very local technical halachic question. It's a way of life question, and someone will say, my Shoresh Neshama is a metaphysical, and I understand what you're saying, that you're saying he's disconnected to reality. But nonetheless, you'll have people that will say, I don't believe in the academic method. I think that it's, the whole statistical analysis is somehow skewed. It's somehow wrong. Again,
I'll give you a clear example. People that refused to get inoculated for measles or for flu.
Vaccination. Exactly.
Vaccination. They didn't want to get vaccinated. I think it was a terrible crime. Mm-hmm. And whether you believe in the Ramban or you don't believe in the Ramban, it was a terrible crime, because there is a proof that vaccination prevents. There is no doubt that vaccination prevents being sick or lowers the risk of contracting the measles, and more than that, it lowers the chances of endangering other people that have reduced immunological immune system.
Right, like sending a kid to school who is not vaccinated. I understand, of course.
They use things like Ramban and Rashba to justify themselves and say that statistics is skewed. So you see, this is the real Naval Bershut Torah, sort of. Once you say that maybe science is not all that is there, so it's very much like to say, I don't believe in the laws of the state, so I can steal. So I begin to steal from the government, and then I can steal from other people. I'm not makpid in other people's money. It's exactly the same. Once you don't believe in a set of rules, so you go to an alternative way of thinking.
Right. Meaning, what you're saying is that our society has accepted these rules, and now you want to be a member of this society, but to live in it under a different set of rules, and this is problematic.
I understand your definition. Mine are different, but it's okay.
Right, it's slightly different. I agree, but you understand where I'm trying to go, though, because it makes it more of a it sharpens the distinction.
Yes.
Rabbi Rappaport, I really want to thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been very instructive and illuminating, and I look forward very much to having you again on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kolsif. So it's a privilege to have on the show Yael Tusk. Mrs. Tusk is a qualified Chinese medicine practitioner here in Yerushalayim, and she's also the author of a very popular book called Health, A Natural Approach, available on Amazon and elsewhere. Mrs. Tusk, thank you very much for being with us. It's really, I think, and let me just perhaps open with a kind of general question to inform listeners, myself included, who are not so familiar with the different approaches that are out there in the complementary or alternative medicine world. What would you say is the definitive or the basic difference between the alternative or the holistic approaches? I know there are many, from the natural medicines and the more energy-based medicines, so perhaps with some distinctions in that. But what's the difference between those types of medicines, those types of treatments or therapies, and what we know as conventional, science-based, evidence-based, often referred to medicine of the Western world? How would you define the differences between them?
Well, first I want to just, to be fair, I want to say that I'm a practitioner of Chinese medicine, and that's really my area of expertise. I have limited knowledge of other areas. So my knowledge of the difference between modern medicine and holistic medicine really comes from my understanding of Chinese medicine. In terms of other modalities, many of them probably share the holistic perspective on health. But let's just say that what I'm saying is comparison between Chinese medicine and modern medicine, just because I don't want to represent other fields that I'm not an expert in.
Chinese medicine being one of the most ancient, I assume, of the complementary medicines that are available.
It's what makes Chinese medicine different than many of the other modalities is that it's very ancient. It's been around for several thousand years. There's debate, but most agree that it's at least 2,000 years old. Other ancient systems are like Ayurvedic medicine, which is the medicine of India, and also there is a medical system like in Judaism that also really correlates with Chinese medicine. There are a lot of similarities. If you look into what the Torah says about health and medicine, you'll see that there's a lot more similarity between the way Chinese medicine approaches the body to the way the Torah approaches the body, and that is the holistic approach to the body, which is. But
by the Torah, really, just by the way, by the Torah, you mean Chazal mainly, or you mean the Torah with Sav?
No. I mean more Chazal.
More Chazal, right? In Chazal, you do have a lot of again, Chazal is before the evidence-based or modern science, so it's not surprising that Chazal's medicine is very different from ours, right?
Now, there's a difference between what I would call the scientific method and evidence-based medicine. The scientific method is the method by which modern medicine draws conclusions. They then extrapolate and call the scientific method an evidence-based model, which I think is a stretch, and I'll explain to you why. But it's also presumptuous to assume that no other model is evidence-based. Of course, other models are evidence-based. If they weren't evidence-based, then they'd be belief-based, which is definitely not how Chinese medicine is practiced at all. In fact, it's extremely evidence-based. It's not based on the scientific method, which is a unique method that is actually a lot more culpable to human error than people realize. So there's basically two aspects to look at. There's the aspect of, the difference between modern medicine and holistic medicine in terms of how the system was developed, in terms of, scientific progress. And then there's the question of how they perceive the body.
Let's get to the perception of the body in a moment. I mean, you mentioned, though, that it's a stretch to call the science-based method an evidence-based method. And the question would be, I imagine and I assume that a lot of the science-based method coming out of academia is subjected to, rigorous tests, some of them placebo-based testing and so on, very rigorous kind of testing. Would you say that that testing is also applied, or similarly rigorous methods are applied also to the complementary medicines?
Well, I would first say that we have to take a step back and ask ourselves how rigorous and perfect the scientific method really is. Sometimes a study can be really well designed and extremely unbiased. The conclusions that are drawn from the study can be very accurate, but at the same time, there are many studies that have serious design flaws and that are really subject to personal biases and subjective, basically the goals of the scientists who created the study. It's very easy to manipulate scientific data to draw conclusions that you want, and I don't think people realize that scientific studies don't mean truth. And if we look at like the last 100 years in modern medicine, it becomes very clear. 1 year they're saying, this is the reality, and then the next year saying, a new study has proven that what we thought was the reality last year is actually
saturated
wrong.
Saturated fats and salt. Whether salt is good for you or saturated fats are good for you. But you know what? Let's assume that the scientific method has certain flaws. But many will say, it's a flawed system, but it's the best we have. Meaning, the question would be,
I don't believe that the scientific method is the best we have. I think, again, to say that evidence-based and the scientific method are equated is not really correct. There is a scientific method, and then there's evidence-based medicine. Whether modern medicine is evidence-based or not, I think, is debatable. Whether any holistic field is evidence-based is also up to, subject to debate. It really depends on the field, how it has been developed. So in terms of modern medicine, if it's evidence-based, then wonderful. But if it's just based on the fact that the scientific method has been used, you have to understand the scientific method can be manipulated. So we can't be sure that the conclusions drawn are accurate. When it comes to Chinese medicine specifically, Chinese medicine was developed, of course, through evidence, not through the scientific method, which is a new method, but that before the scientific method was created, there were methods to determine, whether something was effective or not, whether something was safe or not in terms of medicine. And for thousands of years, they were using methods of experimentation to determine how effective certain treatments were before the scientific method was created. And what does that mean? So it means that there was no placebo control. So placebo control is an interesting method to rule out the placebo effect. But it's not necessary to determine whether something's working or not, because let's say there are other ways to determine whether something is effective, such as through time. You just look at past and present and future, and you compare, how people responded to other methods and how they respond to this method. It may not have been a placebo method, but it's not the same as the one we're using now. So practitioners of Chinese medicine never assumed that what they were doing was going to work without trying and testing it. And
so you would argue then that the Chinese, for simplicity's sake, let's speak about Chinese medicine. You would say that it's based on hundreds or thousands of years of experience. It's not quite the same empirical testing that we have in modern science, but it's a building up of human experience over many, many years, which is also a very strong foundation for its efficacy, efficiency, reliability.
Thousands of years of experience, and also experimentation, and also, intellectual inquiry. It's not simply, we're doing it and now we see it works. So the way Chinese medicine was developed was through asking questions and then testing answers to those questions and then arguing and, treating patients and seeing how effective those treatments were. And then, scholars would debate about the effectiveness of different methods and then compare their notes and compare results. It was a very scholarly system. And it also was based on an infrastructure, like an understanding of the body, which I think is very important. that was very advanced and very developed and also very logical. And also, once you study it, you realize that it's very easy to prove even within your own body, because it's, let's say, for example...
Okay, can you please elaborate? This is the holistic approach versus the reductionist or non-holistic approach.
So, for example, I think of the most simple example is the difference between cold and heat. So it's not very mysterious that some people have a colder constitution and some have a hotter constitution. And it's really not even debatable. You go into a room and some people are like, turn the air conditioner on, and some people are turn on the heat, So you can immediately observe that people have different constitutions. Some people, are out of balance in one direction and some in the other direction, and it's just logical. So Chinese medicine looks at the nature of the human body in terms of hot and cold, in terms of excess and deficiency, of fluid imbalances, and once you understand it, it's really pretty self-explanatory, and it just sort of fits with our understanding of the body, and it also relies a lot on personal experience. We ask a lot of questions, we get a lot of information about how people feel. We don't rely on a lot of objective testing. Although if people bring in their tests, they can be applicable. Certain diseases like anemia are comparable to what Chinese medicine calls blood deficiency. But in general, we can really get a lot of information just from a person's, personal subjective experience with their own body, and also from observation. And this is also something that has been lost in modern medicine that I believe should be regained, which is our ability to diagnose based on, touch and, the use of our eyes, physical observation, the ability of a doctor to be able to look at a patient and figure out what's wrong with them without having to rely on, advanced technology. I think that sort of takes away from the ability of the doctor to treat and diagnose a patient when they can't do it on their own. Even, today doctors often don't know how to use a regular sphygmomanometer. They have these electronic ones, It's come to the point where we're relying so heavily on technology that the human body is sort of lost in the process. And in holistic medicine, as much as it develops, and it continues to develop, it's not just that it's an ancient system that we keep on using. It's an ancient system that we keep adding to, and every generation of new practitioners adds their own insights into the body and their own new ideas about how to treat conditions, and it's basically cumulative over the last several thousand years. And there are new methods such as ear acupuncture, which is very popular today, which is actually developed in the 20th century. And there are other systems that were developed very recently.
You would say just, for example, Chinese medicine, this is not a mystical system. It's a rational system. It's just a different type of logic or different type of analysis than the scientific method.
Absolutely. It's definitely not mystical at all.
Let me ask you a very, a question that I think many people at some stage have to struggle with. And that's, let's say a person is suffering with a disease. Let's take cancer as an extreme example. Somebody is a cancer sufferer, and he has to choose between a variety of different tracks. Now, the obvious choice is to go through the conventional, the regular track, which is chemotherapy and surgery and so on. Would you be confident enough to tell him, don't do chemotherapy, but rather do Chinese or alternative therapy, or go to a practitioner? Because, the kind of anecdotes that people speak about when they want to scare people about alternative practices is, well, yes, somebody was suffering from some disease, and instead of doing the conventional medicine, he went to an alternative practice, and it didn't work, and he died. That's a classic anecdotal scaremongering when it comes to alternative methods. What would your approach be?
We have to ask ourselves, am I risking spreading a cancer or causing cancer with this diagnostic method? That's number one, even before we're talking about treating cancer. So biopsy is one method that can cause cancer to spread. That's a known thing. You can look it up. And then the other thing is, X-rays, which mammograms are X-rays, which are used to look for cancer, but they're also X-rays are a known carcinogen. So does it make sense to risk exposing the body to a carcinogen to prevent cancer? It just doesn't seem totally logical. My point is that there are other ways to treat cancer besides the conventional, and they can be effective, and they can be, and what's good about them is that they're safer, is that they don't include the extreme risks.
Again, they're safer, medicine. But the question is, they're safer based on rigorous studies, or they're safer based on intuitions, and who knows where they're taking that responsibility of having a person not go through the conventional. Again, I'm not saying the conventional medicine is free of flaws, but there's so much research and so much data out there concerning cancer treatments. Where are they going wrong? I mean, aren't they using the best research / data / empirical studies that we have? Now, I understand what you're saying, that there are also other factors, such as the emotional state of a person, such as, his mindset, the anxiety that he suffers from, and so on. But it's a big responsibility.
Well, I didn't say anything about the emotional state at all, although that is very important when it comes to cancer. My point here is that, first of all, for the last 100 years, modern medicine has been basically doing the same thing when it comes to cancer: chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. Now, among those three options, there have been changes. There have been some improvements in certain surgeries. In terms of chemotherapy, the drugs that they have now are not safer than the drugs they had 50 years ago. They're still extremely toxic, and we know they're extremely toxic. It's not even a question whether chemotherapy drugs are very dangerous. And there are a lot of people who are very scared to expose themselves to those side effects. And they don't like the way they feel when they take those drugs. It makes them feel horrible, sicker than they were before they started treatment.
Nauseous, yeah.
So not just nauseous, that's just, one symptom. They really feel like completely debilitated every aspect of their health. So I just believe that, first of all, cancer is the kind of disease that generally moves slowly. Even in aggressive cancer, it's not like, here one day, gone the next. There's usually a little time. And with that time, I think every person should evaluate and weigh for themselves what they want to do, how they want to approach the cancer. Nobody should be forced to go for the conventional treatments when there are other options available. Now, I think one of the most serious challenges when it comes to holistic treatments of cancer is actually money. Although I have heard that modern medicine sometimes can end up causing people to have to take out a second mortgage on their home because it's not always covered by insurance. When it comes to holistic medicine, even if there are methods that are effective, it's often almost totally out of pocket, which is very difficult for people. But there are a lot of options out there, and there are authors who have researched and compiled those options and the practitioners available, and those practitioners are happy to share their experience and what they think is effective, and they're not going to make any promises, and they know which areas they have more of a chance of helping and which areas
meaning if they're serious, they're not going to make promises. You have some who are the more, I don't want to say charlatans, but those who are less serious, they might make promises. If someone makes you a promise, then don't believe him. That's what you would say.
Basically, that's true. But, it's always good to find a practitioner who has a very good reputation, someone who has many years of experience in this field. And that's something that,
Right. So to sum up, you would say to any, chas v'shalom, a person with any kind of issue, don't be blindfolded. Do the research, read up on the different alternatives and the different options available, and make an educated decision. That's what you would
and don't rush into
advise.
Anything. Take the time.
Right.
So many of these stories that I told you in the beginning of this parsha of people who were so severely debilitated by their cancer treatments, it was like one day diagnosis, next day treatment began. And you know what? In one case, after the person was severely debilitated by modern medicine, they decided they wanted to go for holistic. And I have to tell you something. Holistic medicine is very, very gentle, and generally, even though it can be effective, it's really very difficult to treat someone who's already been devastated by chemotherapy, drugs, and radiation.
Got it.
At that point, to go back and say, oh, you know what, I've changed my mind. Modern medicine is devastating my system too much. I feel too sick from these treatments, I want to try something else. It's usually too late at that point. And that the holistic practitioners do not like to take, those secondary cases that have already tried modern medicine and just, can't handle the treatments, or the treatments aren't working, which happens sometimes, very often actually. But it's just, if someone could go and make an educated decision and take the time to weigh the different options. And my problem with modern medicine is that they don't even acknowledge that other options exist, and they do. There are other things that work, and cancer is not one of those new diseases that's only been around for the last 100 years. It has existed for thousands of years, and there were treatments for cancer before modern medicine came along. And I believe some of what makes cancer so frightening is the way modern medicine treats it. And if we can make cancer less frightening, I think we'll make it more treatable as well.
Let me just go towards the end of the interview. I'll be very interested to hear your take on the Jewish angle here. Obviously, you're an observant Jew. You might not believe in Chinese medicine, but you believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and in the truth of the Torah. How do these go together? How does your Jewish background and your Jewish faith animate or contour your path in this area of medicine and Chinese medicine and the holistic view of the body that really guides your path in healing?
Well, I do see that when it comes to the holistic perspective on the body, that there's a lot more room for belief in Hashem. Sometimes when we get lost in modern medicine, it can be difficult to remember who's in control of the body, who's in control of our health. We sort of give ourselves over to the doctor, to the hospital, and we put our faith in them, and that can be a little bit scary. In fact, that is what scared me about cancer. Was the most frightening thing was having to put myself, the thought of having to put myself into the hands of a human being, a fallible human being, and trusting them with my life. And modern medicine can be very aggressive in such a way that, you have to remember that Hashem is in control of the body. I feel like sometimes when it comes to modern medicine, we first do whatever the hishtadlus is, and then we remember about Hashem and we daven. And that can happen with anything. Even with Chinese medicine.
And in the holistic
and then
version,
remember, wait, I have to ask Hashem.
Right. So why is the holistic version? Why is the holistic version by definition so different to that?
Somehow there's just more room for Hashem in our minds when we go down the holistic path. It's just, holistic medicine is much more humble in a way. We sort of, at least from the Chinese medicine perspective, but I believe that this is true from every holistic avenue, which is that we don't believe that we're controlling the body or that we are controlling nature or health at all. Nature is something that we can't control. All we can do, and also something that we don't want to control. Nature was created perfectly. When things get out of balance, it's generally because of mistakes that we make, and what we have to do is put the body back in balance by undoing those mistakes for the most part. Now, that doesn't mean that Chinese medicine is accusatory. A patient doesn't come in and I tell them, well, you've eaten poorly and you're not getting enough sleep, but sometimes it can be environmental exposures that we don't have any control of. But the point is that bringing a person back to health means bringing them back to the way they were created. So you sort of find Hashem in this process when you realize how beautifully the human body was created, and that we can trust the human body to heal itself, because Hashem created an amazing system. And when we treat, all we do is sort of gently stimulate the body to heal itself, and then we rely on the body the body's internal wisdom that Hashem created in every person to really, stimulate healing. And I think it's because, holistic medicine is so much more humble and gentle that we're just basically, doing gentle stimulation and gentle manipulations to allow the body to go back to normal, which is the way it was created. That we're not playing God, we're asking Hashem to help the body heal itself.
Right. Very interesting to hear that. Have you been in touch, just out of interest, with any rabbinic figures, with rabbonim, authorities of any type, to hear their approach to Chinese medicine and to holistic healing?
Well, when I was in graduate school studying Chinese medicine, the question did come up: is Chinese medicine avodah zarah? So one of my classmates went to one of Rav Moshe Feinstein's sons. I don't remember which one. I don't want to say the wrong name. And asked, the question, and basically he answered that, as long as we're not doing like any sort of incantations or there are no beliefs involved, beliefs in any kind of other power, so it's fine. And we left it at that. And since then, there has been a lot more halachic discourse on the topic, and I believe that you really have to understand Chinese medicine in depth to even ask the question. And it has been analyzed by certain rabbanim in more recent years, and there are books. There's a book called Alternative Medicine and Halacha, which analyzes it. But there are among systems that are problematic, there aren't many. And basically, problematic systems usually involve some sort of, strange incantations that are not directed towards, Hashem. And I don't think most Jewish practitioners are, I don't know of any Jewish practitioners who are doing that. But basically, Chinese medicine is not, again, it's not a belief system. We're not worshiping anything.
Chinese medicine is exactly. It's not supernatural. It's like you say. It's a more maybe subtle understanding of the natural, but it's not something supernatural, and therefore it doesn't belong in this category.
Also, to differentiate between modern medicine and Chinese medicine, there is a perspective on the body that there is energy in the body, which is something that is not well understood in modern medicine. Although recently there's a Carulian photography that has been able to actually demonstrate this body's energy.
I've heard about this. Right, I've heard about this.
So it's that very interesting thing to look into, which shows that there is actually a lot more to the body than can be simply observed, with the naked eye. So people get a little nervous when you talk about energy, but we're not talking about some kind of force that we worship. We're talking about energy that runs through the body that, you feel when you have energy, you feel when you don't have energy. It's not a worshipful phenomenon. But we definitely treat the body's energy in Chinese medicine, whether there's deficiency of energy or excess. It's an aspect of the body that we address. We address it with herbs, which shows that it's really a physical thing. Chinese medicine is not a spiritual system at all. In fact, China isn't a very spiritual place. And their most spiritual understandings of the human body are really very physical. They don't know about the neshama. They know about what they call the spirit, which is really just our consciousness. And that's like the most spiritual that they get. So it's not a very spiritual system, even though I did say it's a humble system and it leaves room for Hashem. You have to know about Hashem to include Hashem in your practice, And China wasn't. They're definitely over the avodah zarah.
Right. It's okay. I understand, and I think we'll leave it there because we have to leave some room, like you say. Part of the humility is we're going to leave room for other guests. But this has been very illuminating and very insightful. And really, thank you very much for coming on. And wish you a lot of success in your endeavors. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Atzlacha Rabba.
Thank you, Untitled. Bye-bye. Moving on to our next guest for this show. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover all elements and all angles of complementary or alternative medicine. There are many of them, but certainly one of the most important ones for us to think about, one of the angles that will be relevant for each one of us, Emir Hashem, at some stage during his life, is the angle of childbirth, where there's also a fascinating debate between what's known as allopathic or conventional medicine and complementary or alternative concepts of childbirth that don't necessarily tally or agree with everything that you might hear with your doctor, but could present us with very important and very relevant insights. So we're honored, and it's a real pleasure to have with us today Judy Ribner. Mrs. Ribner is a certified nurse midwife. She's also doing a doctorate, a DNP at New York University, NYU. And Judy, thank you very much for being with us today. It's I think going to be a very insightful conversation. And just to open up, if my wife, let's say, would go to a allopathic, a conventional medical practitioner, a gynecologist, and she would ask him, where should I give birth to my next baby, Amir Hashem? Should I do so in a hospital setting, which is what generally I guess the majority of women do, or should I think about an alternative setting, let's say a home birth or another sort of birth? So he would probably tell me, I would say 99.9% would say for sure hospital birth, that's the safest thing, that's the best thing. Now I understand that you're promoting and certainly endorsing alternative settings for childbirth based on a different view, based on a more holistic view of gynecology than scientific medicine would have it. Can you just please explain then what's the impetus for this? Like how do you have the confidence to say something which is really, I suppose, not accepted by most scientific practitioners?
So that's such a good question because, it appears that I'm being courageous by promoting home birth or promoting birthing center birth, both of which are referred to as community birth, when hospital delivery is the normative in the 21st century.
Absolutely, correct.
But really, when we take an unbiased view at the evidence and the outcomes and the research on home birth versus hospital birth, it's quite compelling that home birth is not just as safe, but perhaps even safer than a hospital birth for low-risk women. And that criteria, by the way, of low-risk women does differ from one industrialized country to the other. But in the United States, a low-risk woman is defined as somebody who does not have medical complications during pregnancy and is carrying one baby who's head first. And most pregnant women are eligible and really encouraged to home birth based on their risk profile. So it's not my own personal view that home birth is an intervention-free space that allows a woman to birth autonomously. And
could you just explain for listeners who might not be familiar with the terms, what do you mean intervention-free?
Intervention-free means that the woman is not surrounded by an operating room, by uniformed professionals who are strangers to her. She's not surrounded by, all sorts of drugs and beeping machines and monitors.
Right, or possibly taking an epidural.
Right. And there's no epidural option at home. I will tell you that home birth midwives, of course, carry emergency medications because they're not rebelling against medical advances. They're integrating Western medicine safely. So if, a hemorrhage were to happen, which is less likely at home than a hospital, they certainly are equipped and trained and will utilize Western medicine as necessary. When we say an intervention-free space, we mean the normal is not to use the intervention, as opposed to in a hospital, the normal is to use intervention and to what we call actively managed labor, which means to give Pitocin, to give synthetic hormone, to keep the labor going at the pace that the hospital has determined is most suitable for labor. The American College of Nurse-Midwives is a professional association that represents certified nurse-midwives and certified midwives in the United States, and they've issued a pretty clear position statement regarding the safety of home birth. And interestingly, even ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which represents OBGYNs, physicians in the United States, they too have published on the outcomes of home birth earlier this year, earlier in 2019. And they draw data from countries across the world which demonstrate consistently that not only is there either no increased risk to the newborn or an increased risk that is not considered statistically significant, but there is dramatic reduction in risk to the mother by birthing outside of a hospital. And ACOG even published that VBACs, twins, and breeches, all of whom earlier in our discussion we said would be risked out of home birth in the United States, even those groups of women in some countries are encouraged to home birth. And when we think about how can that be, because when I first learned the data, I was utterly shocked.
And how could it be, given that we hear a lot of horror stories and we hear a lot of, I've certainly heard these, home birth, these quacky mothers that want to give birth at home, and these awful things can happen. Again, I'm not endorsing any position here. I'm just saying the kind of stories that you hear now and again.
Right. I know there's so much socially produced anxiety about childbirth, and anecdotal evidence, of course, generates fear. But most interesting is that people who view home birthers as parents who are, preferring a crunchy, organic experience at the sake of their baby's health and life are really not well informed of the fact that not only does the baby not be put at risk, but that there's even benefits to the baby and to the mother. Babies who are born at home are less likely to have their cord cut and clamped early, so they have better neurodevelopmental outcomes. They have stronger immune systems because they're being born in a space that's not ridden with germs, strange germs. The bonding, the breastfeeding outcomes are better at home. In the United States, we have a national 32% C-section rate. And for women who are aged 40 and older.
Again, 32%, meaning 32% of the totality of women that come to give birth via C-section.
Via major abdominal surgery.
Third.
A third.
Wow, okay.
And in New York, it's actually higher than that. And nationally, for women who are 40 years and older, the cesarean rates in the United States have reached 48.2%. Most people coming to a hospital do not know what their doctor's rates are. And the reason for that is such data is protected. You can't, I wanted to apply for a research grant and draw the data of popular physician practices and expose what are the episiotomy rates, what are the cesarean delivery rates, what are the vacuum rates, so that women can make an informed choice in advance of how vulnerable will they be to a knife when they're laboring. But you can't expose such data. So the only data we have is based on hospitals. And there are hospitals in New York with over a 50% C-section rate. And the question is... And
you're saying, and you're saying that these C-section deliveries are actually unnecessary, meaning they would be better off in a home environment where a C-section is not actually, is not possible.
So the World Health Organization has issued a statement on what's considered the ideal and safe, beneficial cesarean rate of the given population. And the World Health Organization is an association that was created by the United Nations for public health, for public international health concerns. And the World Health Organization...
They've been in the news recently because of the coronavirus. Everyone's talking about it.
Right.
So we know about them today. Okay.
So the World Health Organization has stated that any cesarean rate that exceeds 10% does not improve outcomes. And when you look at the New York State Department of Health website, most of the serious complications and maternal deaths are actually associated with cesarean delivery, not natural birth. And when you look at hospitals that have more than a 5 times greater cesarean rate than what's considered safe, that's when we see that the risks of major surgery are outweighing the benefits. So either these C-sections are unnecessary or they were preventable, which means they resulted from a cascade of interventions that never would have happened and never would have become necessary had the woman not entered the hospital setting in the first place. And don't get me wrong, this is not to say that everybody who has a baby at home never has a cesarean. There is a transfer rate, a very small percentage of women who do give birth at home who during the labor course will deviate from safe labor, and the baby or mother will show indication that this birth is better happening in a hospital. And in such case, of course, a responsible home birth midwife will transfer to the hospital.
So let me ask you this then. What's the medical community, or the medical scientific community, what are they missing? If the facts and figures are really as you say, that we have, a serious, or if you want, a statistical advantage or preference for home births or for alternative births rather than hospital births, then what's the scientific community missing? What is it that's preventing them from seeing this? Or maybe in other terms, we could posit a similar question by saying what is it actually that the home setting why is it that the home setting is more advantageous, is better? Meaning, I understand that there are some medical practices or procedures that can be avoided. But before you just spoke about just being at home is better per se, because you don't have strange people around you, because you don't have machinery around you. That's something which is hard to quantify or to define in a scientific way.
There's a position out there that believes that anybody who is licensed to attend a woman at birth should be required to observe birth also in an undisturbed setting, like a home birth. Because until you actually witness it, it's so dramatically different than the delivery process at a hospital. So it's not shocking that it has such different outcomes. Even notice the words labor and delivery. Is it labor and birth? It's really not a birth. It's a delivery. There's active management in the process. It's not instinct-led. Women aren't on their all fours, on their hands and knees, birthing in a physiologic position with gravity, without any disturbance, so that their hormones can surge to the fullest extent like other mammals do. In 1900, only 5% of American births took place in a hospital. And in 1935, already 75% of American births took place in a hospital. And I would have assumed, before I became informed, I would have assumed that during those 35 years, we saw dramatic improvements, right, as the shift from home birth to hospital birth happened. But quite the contrary is true. During those years, there was a steady increase in maternal mortality and neonatal mortality. It wasn't until the 1950s that we saw the dramatic reductions in maternal and infant deaths. So we can't even attribute the initial movement of home birth to hospital birth for safety reasons, because it just wasn't the reality. And in urban areas where women were more likely to give birth in a hospital, the mortality rates showed it, and the mortality rates were higher. When I went to Switzerland, and I went to labor and delivery there because I was so curious to see a different model of care, Switzerland is one of the many countries that has much better outcomes than we do. So I wanted to see, what are they doing differently? I mean, unless evolution has created American women all defective, what's the Swiss system doing differently than we are? And when I went there, I was amazed to find out that science was driving policy, because only midwives were allowed to attend a natural birth, and a physician was required to have a midwife present in order to attend a natural birth. Physicians were only allowed to attend cesarean delivery, which is our expertise, of course.
Physicians are not allowed, let me get this straight, physicians are not allowed to attend a regular birth, a natural birth?
Without a midwife present, because the expert on natural birth is not a surgeon. It's not an OBGYN. It's not their training. It's not their expertise. It's inappropriate. 89% of American births are managed by physicians. We're one of the only countries in the world who does that. And our healthcare costs and our cesarean rate reflects it. So in Switzerland, you have a midwife present at every birth, and sometimes with a physician, sometimes not. But I wish I can say that midwifery in a hospital is a solution, and some people might think it is. But given that hospital policy is not set by ACNM, the American College of Nurse-Midwives, it's set by physicians because they represent the majority, the policies in American hospitals really limit the extent that midwives can truly practice the midwifery profession. So women can't truly benefit from full midwifery model of care in such a setting.
Okay. Let me ask you a question from a slightly different angle. I see that your field, if you want, in a broad sense, is often referred to as holistic gynecology, meaning it's gynecology, but with a slightly different approach, a holistic approach, which separates it from the, I guess, conventional gynecological attitude towards these kind of treatments. In which sense? What do you mean what do we mean when we speak about a holistic approach to gynecology, which obviously rings of other holistic approaches to a very broad range of treatments and of medical areas. In which way is it holistic?
The concept of holistic care is considered in this part of the world as complementary or alternative, which of course reifies that allopathic medicine should be the normative and that allopathic medicine is the gold standard. So I really even try to stay away from that terminology, because holistic really means you view the human body in totality, which is truly what it is. We're not just a bunch of organs that are randomly functioning next to each other. We're an integrated system. And to acknowledge that a human being has emotions that can impact the way the whole organism functions is the truth. Allopathic medicine tends to focus more on the view that the body's like a machine and that it's just
more mechanical,
exactly.
or materialistic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How many people have gone to a physician and have been asked, how have you been feeling emotionally in the last 2 weeks? It's more emphasis on exclusively the physical.
Right.
We know that there's a concept of a placebo effect. So clearly there is meaning the scientific community has acknowledged that there's a placebo effect. So clearly that has driven research principles, right? Because we recognize that it wouldn't be scientifically sound if we didn't account for that variable. So we really are acknowledging that the mind does have power over healing. And holistic in general, there's a very wide spectrum of what people consider holistic, but holistic in general really, let's say in gynecology, is recognizing you're not treating a uterus, you're treating a human being.
And that's why being at home could actually make a difference, because it gives you a different mindset, a different certain calmness of nature. The environment can be really significant.
Absolutely. I will tell you, ironically, that some women tend to do better in a hospital in today's day because they've been socialized to think that the hospital is safer. Their labor might actually be impeded if they remained home. And that's just, of course, a byproduct of cultural conditioning. That's not the true reality.
And they'll suffer from a real anxiety from being at home, and therefore they might actually need... So the hospitals or the hospital mentality is creating a need for hospitals. That's what you would say.
Well, certainly some emergencies that happen as a result of hospital intervention would require a hospital, most definitely.
Right. Okay,
and certainly the psychological impact of being in a hospital at times does stall labor. At times it does create dysfunctional patterns. At times it does interfere with a woman's ability to birth. But home birth is not for everybody just because a woman meets the criteria for being recommended to give birth at home. There, of course, is a psychological component, and that can't be ignored or neglected because birth is not just a physical event. It's a delicate balance of hormones and emotional state. It's a journey. It's not just a machine expelling a fetus from a body.
Tell me, as an observant Jew, as somebody who both practices religion and feels the Hakadosh Baruch Hu accompanying us in everything we do, how does your Jewish life or the Jewish if you want a mindset that accompanies you in everything you do, how does that dovetail or go together with this approach? Obviously, this is not a strictly a Jewish invention that as a concept. It's something that's been done for many years. Do you see it as being something that is specifically or has a relationship, a connection to the Jewish foundations that you carry with you?
I've been lucky enough to be invited to people's births, which was really a privilege, and I'm deeply appreciative of that because birth is such a personal experience. And when I observed from being at hospital deliveries and what I observed at home births is firstly a very big difference in the modesty. And that's certainly a value amongst Jewish women, is to avoid unnecessary exposure for people when it's not medically beneficial. So that's certainly one way that the whole home birth model of care is aligned with our cultural values. And the other question, of course, is we value having babies, and to have a baby through surgery is not a sustainable way to build a family. We need to do it the most gentle, least interventive way for it to be doable and fun and healthy for mothers and babies. Additionally, from my understanding of Halacha, and that is not at all my expertise, but I was under the impression that surgery is not looked at callously.
Right. Any intervention, any surgical intervention is considered a sakana, meaning it's something which should be avoided wherever possible.
Right.
At the same time, if a non-surgical environment could be a greater danger, then everything depends on the circumstances.
Right. So if the risk for surgery in a particular hospital is over 75%, and I'm not throwing out that number arbitrarily, right? ACOG just published that in some hospitals, that the range for first-time mothers cesarean rates in California were from 11% in one hospital to 77% in another.
77 for first-time mothers?
Yeah, and that did not include breaches, and that did not include twins. It was for first-time mothers who were low risk. So, people ask a Shaila, can I home birth? Well, you for sure need to inform the Rav of what is the evidence on home birth. This isn't anecdotal, this evidence. This is very easily quantifiable research. England's NICE has a clear position statement on the safety of home birth and that it's optimal for multiparous women. And the United States has a lot of data on it, and so many other countries have issued position statements. So the shaila really is, can a woman even go to a setting? I question, can a woman go to a setting where she has such a high likelihood of surgery when it's been well established that such surgery is not medically necessary or beneficial? Quite the contrary. So what is the threshold for risk and tolerance that we have in Judaism towards surgery? I don't know, but that should be a discussion. I want to mention another piece about childbirth that's not as talked about, but it's significant. The laceration rates in hospitals, according to ACOG, most women tear during a birth. And most of those tears, according to ACOG, are second-degree tears, which means that they involve muscles. They're not so superficial. ACOG also published that the research has shown that home birth versus hospital birth, the laceration in a hospital is 7 times as great than in a home birth, and that home births have an over.
How do you explain that?
That's a very good question. I think it might be that when you have a home birth, midwives in general have been trained to be attentive to the perineum, that it shouldn't tear. So they'll slow the mother down, or they'll use a warm compress. And I think a lot of it is also positional, that at home birth, women tend to go in the position that's most comfortable and natural, which is typically on hands and knees or kneeling, whereas in the hospital, they're more on their back or sitting upward, coming from their back, like on a bed. So the head directs more trauma to that area than what that part of the body was really intended to endure. like they're pushing their baby uphill against gravity and against their anatomy.
Right.
So I will tell you, going to the mikvah is directly impacted by trauma there. And as a certified bodekes, I've seen even like 8 months after a birth, women having difficulty getting to the mikvah because of, let's say, an episiotomy or a really bad laceration. So that benefit truly does, that benefit truly has merit for Jewish women or for anybody, really.
Right. Right. Let me ask you just a final question, which I think is maybe broadening the issue beyond the the narrow scope of childbirth, and is really a broader issue, and that would be the following question. I mean, generally speaking, both general society and I would say the halachic establishment, if you want, the Rabbanim generally will respond to most questions about medical practices, generally speaking, including birth, but also everything else, by saying, we defer to the medical profession, we defer to the scientific research, we defer to the to the medical practitioners. And would you say that there's perhaps a danger or a certain risk that if we start, saying, well, maybe the medical profession has it wrong, or they're not taking into account the mind-body relationship and the holistic view of person, then we're also opening the door for all kinds of, practitioners, alternative, complementary, some of them charlatans, some of them not so, serious. How can we really be, confident when given advice by, people who are not from within the scientific community, that what they're saying is really sound?
When it comes to birth, it's much easier because, like we said, that we have professional organizations that have issued position statements on it, and that this is backed by science. This is not anecdotal, and there's hundreds of thousands of home births happening a year. So there are statistically significant.
And these are being done by certified midwives, meaning that's something which you should just be aware of, that if somebody wants to have a home birth or an outside hospital birth, then you would need to have a certified midwife in attendance.
I would recommend using a professional whose expertise is out of hospital birth and home birth, because the process is so different than the hospital. So you'd want somebody with that experience. But let's say if you take England's government, England, did the largest study on home birth outcomes back in 2011. It was 61,000 women that they studied across different settings. That's what drove their position statement on home birth outcomes. So in that regard, it's not really difficult this isn't an exception. This isn't alternative. This really should be the standard of care. This should become the gold standard. In terms of other holistic medicine, it's pretty rational. Like, it's not so radical to say that we have to see the whole clinical picture, that we have to recognize that different organs work with each other, and that intersectionality is sometimes where the answer lies. The fragmented view that, we specialize, we have one foot doctor, we specialize somebody else with the kidneys, someone else is specialized with bones, is just a reality when we have so much modern medical knowledge, which is amazing, and it had to be divided up. But to say that should be challenged is reasonable. I don't think that that's a dangerous route to go down. Even the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has stated that in hospital settings, up to 50% of antibiotic administration is inappropriate. So Western medicine is acknowledging its own overuse of its wonderful and powerful tools, or its misuse. So the people who are on that train of thinking are ahead of the times. They're not backward. And I don't think it opens up a dangerous
Right, they're ahead of the times, even though you might say that before the scientific method, I mean, this was the conventional thinking, meaning the more holistic approach was, this is probably what, many, again, I don't know because I wasn't there, but, looking in the Rambam, for example, or in other classical sources, you would say that they were, holistic, if you want, practitioners in many ways.
It's hard for me to understand how the Rambam would qualify as a medical physician, because does he advocate for the suppression of symptoms by the use of chemicals? That is what the medical profession's expertise is. He advocates for nutrition. So in today's terminology, I would question if he would be considered a naturopathic doctor who, when somebody had an ailment, would address what are this person's vitamin deficiencies. What has this person put in his or her mouth in the last 2 weeks?
Right.
Why is the body reacting in this way?
Alongside exercise and diet, of course, and other things
and
that the
sleep.
Rambam recommends.
And he talks about healthy
sleep, of course.
Right.
Of course.
I do want to mention something that's very contemporary. Literally, that came out in 2018. There was something called the Arrive trial, and as many of your listeners are aware, we don't go to Pidyon HaBens too often, and that's not an accident given the current medical paradigm of care and the routinization of medically managed birth. The Arrive trial was sponsored by the High Risk OBGYN organization that came out advocating for the routine induction of labor for low-risk first-time mothers at 39 weeks, which means they want that every pregnant woman who a week before her due date should be medically induced. So we're going to be...
1 minute, on which grounds?
That they believe that it will improve outcomes for the neonate without improving the cesarean rates. And ACNM, the American College of Nurse-Midwives, has come out strongly against it, demonstrating where there were fundamental flaws in the research. But the reality is that there are hospitals and there are physicians who are leaning more and more toward inducing women earlier and earlier, and the noose surrounding healthy, robust pregnancies is becoming tighter. And male fetuses tend to gestate longer, and first-time mothers tend to carry pregnancies longer as well. So the woman who would typically make a Pidyon HaBen, a first-time mother carrying a male fetus, is going to be most at risk nowadays for an induction. And as we know, inductions do result in cesareans because you're pulling out a baby before it's time. Did you ever try to, peel a banana when it's dark green? You sometimes have to cut it open. The peel doesn't slip off easily. If you've ever tried to peel an avocado before it's time, when it's not ripe, it's difficult to remove the baby. And these quote-unquote failed inductions result in cesareans. So it's not people's imagination that pregnancy lengths are getting shorter. They have been, and outcomes are getting worse with it. So I just want to bring that to people's attention because that's very, very new. Okay.
Well, Mrs. Ribner, thank you very much. Midrash Hashem, there should be many more Pidyon HaBens on account of of all of these advancements. And really appreciate your insights. I'm sure listeners will have a lot of benefit from them. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be well. Called.